everybody. I see some faces now that are familiar to me from being on these online classes. I'm happy you're here. I also know that it isn't the most ideal situation. That would be best if we were all in the room together, but it is what it is. And I think everybody is making the best of this particular time, which is a time that offers possibilities as well as limitations. And right now I'm hearing like a doorbell going off every time a new person comes into the class. So I'm getting little signals that are coming through. So today's topic is maybe one of the more difficult topics that I've talked about. In a sense, I found myself having a kind of heavy heart about doing this topic because it is so hard to talk about it, that even talking about it seems like makes for some of the difficulties of the thing itself, which is the thing of self-deception and the way in which we may try to promote ourselves as morally superior to other people, maybe without even noticing that we're doing it, and often perhaps without recognizing the difficulties that it causes and the destruction overall that it brings about for human beings trying to work together or be together or live together or anything together. So I thought I'd spend a moment here at the beginning just framing things like I have been doing on these classes and letting you know that, of course, I deal with two different general frames of reference. One of those is psychology, clinical psychology and developmental psychology. And the other one is Buddhism, particularly from the mindfulness side, but also sometimes from the actual teachings of the Buddha, which we will get into a little bit today. And also in this framework, part of what I wanted to say is that at this particular moment, you know, with the opportunities afforded to us by this virus, we need to pay attention to opinions and points of view that are truly different from our own. And even though most of us probably count ourselves as open-minded, we may not recognize the degree to which we are definitely triggered by opposing points of view and also by people around us whom we love, respect, engage with, when they seem not to see, hear, or feel us as individuals. Last Saturday, I talked especially about how difficult it is to accurately reflect or attune yourself to someone else. And that is not because of something within you. It is something within the overall human mechanism. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. That has to do with the complexity of the organism, the complexity of our brain, and the ways that we protect ourselves and promote ourselves in groups and our dependence on groups in order to see ourselves. So we are set up for very complex interactions with each other and a lot of misattunement. And in other periods of time, when people were living with more hierarchy in their families, their societies, their homes, perhaps emotional attunement wasn't so important to people's sense of self after the children grew up or whatever. I mean, I think there's always been concern to be emotionally attuned to very young children because they're very dependent. But after children grew up, after they became teenagers, often what had to happen within a family or a relationship was just that orders were followed, people were oppressed, things happened. There wasn't so much of a focus on getting each other and making things accurate about the other person. But now we're entering into a different period of time in which equality and reciprocity are very high goals or values for many people in their relationships, in their families, in our societies, and also even perhaps among nations, although that's arguable. But so we're moving from hierarchy to equality and reciprocity. We're moving from not needing those skills of emotional attunement to needing them a lot. And we're also still dealing with all of the difficulties that humans have dealt with over time. And at this moment, we're in a uniquely stressful, isolated, and I would say polarized situation in regard to the coronavirus, the economic difficulties that we're in as a culture, the isolation, the shutdown, and all of the different points of view that are around us about how to solve problems and what to do about them at the same time that our government overall is shutting us down and giving us regulations for operating. So given all of this, there's a particularly high value on being able to listen to a point of view or an opinion that's truly different from your own, that might even offend you. I would say, even when the ones offend you, that's a particularly good opportunity. And also people who maybe in your environment have hurt your feelings or seem to have harmed you in some way. Can you hear them? Can you listen to them? So the class today, one reason why I decided to do this topic is that I'm going to be going on Saturday when I teach the course on living together without falling apart. I'm going to go in depth into our experience of our own worlds, our subjectivity, what I call our subjective snow globe. And today I thought that I would give a little bit of a preview about it because I have listened to so many podcasts now and so many pundits talking about how we have to work together, and we have to work together on so many things, on how we're going to build our economies back, on what we're going to do about future pandemics, on the crisis, on the climate crisis, on various social kinds of concerns. In all of those conversations, what I heard was an emphasis on our interdependence and our working together, but not a recognition that all of this depends on our ability to dialogue with each other. It does not depend on simply presenting certain kinds of facts and certain kinds of evidence. Everybody has already tried that. And in regard to the climate crisis or climate science, in regard to topics like 5G, which come up often online, or topics like vaccinations, or topics like lockdown or herd immunity. These are all topics that set off people's red flags of how am I going to react to that? And these are the topics that require hearing both sides of the argument, the debate, the conversation. There are many, many other topics like this, but these are the ones that at this moment in time are particularly central. So, given that it's difficult for us to attune to each other, it's difficult for us to reflect each other accurately, what do we get out of listening to a different point of view? Like, where's that going? Shouldn't we just sort of stand up for our own point of view and argue for it and collect evidence? From my perspective, not only does that way of operating lead to deep divisions and then potentially to war, but also it's one of the ways of depriving yourself of knowing yourself. And what I mean by that is if you preach to the choir You're preaching to your own point of view all the time. You're simply reinforcing your own point of view. So before I get into the details of how to work with your self-deception and how to reduce your sense of virtue signaling or moral superiority, I want to take a moment to say that when you're able to do this thing that we're calling dialogue, or keeping a mindful space between you and another person so you can actually listen to a difficult conversation, before you actually learn how to do that and think about it in detail, you should recognize that it is the way that you can figure out what you think and feel if you can hear all the way through some point of view that's really different from your own. So when I talk about real dialogue, I am not talking about compromise. I'm not talking about conflict resolution. And I am not talking about coming up with some kind of agreement. What I'm talking about is one very clear and actually difficult thing, which is to actually listen all the way through somebody else's argument or point of view, checking out along the way, did I get that? Am I reflecting you accurately when I paraphrase you? Do I get your assumptions? Do I actually infer what you are saying and thinking? And when you actually get that, you will see a world that is different from your own. And in that way, you can clarify your own thinking, your own feeling, and see if you've actually worked things through in your own mind. So one of the big reasons to speaking to somebody who actually thinks differently than you do about climate science, about vaccinations, about President Trump, about what's going on with lockdowns, about what's going to happen after we get out, how are we going to handle the pandemic. A very important reason for talking to someone who thinks differently than you do is that you will find more about how you think and feel if you truly can understand the full conversation on the other side of that difference. So, you know, some of you who follow my work know that I place a lot of importance on the songs and teachings of Leonard Cohen, because I think not only was he a great poet, but also he was a great spiritual teacher in his way. And he has a song called Different Sides, which is on his CD, which is called Old Ideas. And in this song, he says, we find ourselves on different sides of a line nobody drew. While it might be one in the higher eye, down here where we live, it is two. So I'm just going to say that once more, just to kind of let it echo. We find ourselves on different sides of a line nobody drew. While it might be one in the higher eye, down here where we live, it is two. So where we live, there are different sides. And if we cannot live with the different sides, then we're always in a state of instability, potential aggression, feelings of threat, and an inability to deal with difference. Again, I want to emphasize, I'm not talking about compromise. I am not talking about getting some balanced view. I'm talking about being able to live and listen to the other side, just to learn what the other side is saying, and then see what you think. So that capacity to work with both sides is something that human beings can do. Other animals can't do it. Other animals have to just do the fight, the flight, or the freeze. We can do the reflect, the listen, the let's consider what the other person is saying or thinking or feeling. So Why is that so difficult? That's what we're going to talk about now. So let me talk for a moment about self-deception and why we can't see ourselves easily, and we can't actually see what it is that we think and feel in a way that's ever really completely clear. So Lori, if you put up that first slide with a snow globe on it, I'll go over this with you. And if this is your first track through this material, believe me, I wouldn't expect that you'd get it all in one swallow, because it's complex, but I think it will make sense in terms of your experience. So all of us exist within a frame of reference that we're going to call our subjectivity. That is, that's our experience as an individual. It's the way we think and feel, the way we hear and perceive, and so on. And within the domain of our subjectivity, there are 6 different aspects. And I'm just going to name these and go through them quickly to give you a feeling for, or a taste of, what I'm talking about. So first, I'm going to look at the sense of hearing. So we all can hear in to our own minds. We hear ourselves talking. And often when we're in a moment of emotional threat, what we listen to primarily is what we're saying to ourselves. And so we're preparing an argument we're going to make, or we're talking about what the other person is saying. We're hearing in to the words in our own mind. We're not hearing out to what the other person is saying. So hearing in is the way that you hear the talk in your own mind, the words that are going through. All of us have that. It's a human capacity the world over, no matter what language, what culture, or whatever. Hearing out is the other way we use our hearing sense, and that's when we hear out to the world, the sounds that are going on around us, and also what other people are saying to us. Once we have mastered language, we very often translate the sounds very quickly into words, and if a human being is speaking them, and we'll go along with the words, we'll take those somewhere, we'll hear back into the mind. So hearing out and hearing in are both subjective senses of hearing, and they're both located, roughly speaking, around your ears. When you try to hear into your own mind, it's also roughly around your ears most of the time that you're going to hear into your mind. And hearing out is going to come through the perception of your ears. So let me just say, in terms of hearing in and hearing out, we often get mixed up about whether we're listening to ourselves or some other person speak. So we're listening to a conversation and we believe we've heard it, but actually partly what we've been hearing is what we've been saying to ourselves. So we may imagine that we've heard something, or we may imagine that the person has said something that's not the case. So that's hearing in and hearing out. Then there is seeing in and seeing out. So we see into our mind's eye. If actually you don't know how you see into your mind's eye, just picture what you're going to have for dinner, and you'll see something in your mind's eye, or picture how you drive from point A to point B. It's not difficult to recognize how you perceive the images in your mind. And then when you're dreaming at night, you're perceiving some of those images without perceiving the world outside. And so then you're seeing into the images in your dreams. So you're seeing in all the time. You're getting images. You may be unconscious of them. They're floating through. And you're seeing out into the world, into your visual field around you. So when you're seeing through your mind's eye, you may be seeing the other person as looking angry at you, feeling hurt, or perhaps in some way motivated towards you in a way that you're actually feeling emotionally, but you're seeing that in your mind's eye. It's confused with the way you're seeing the person. So subjectively, you can see others as actually meaning certain things to you that they're not intending, that's not going on. So seeing in and seeing out, very complex when it comes to being an eyewitness, and particularly in times of threat, you're going to see things that are not there. Again, both of these, in the hearing in and hearing out, seeing in and seeing out, there's been a lot of cognitive science built around these these things that I'm telling you, and you can look online and find out about perception and how inaccurate human beings are in perceiving the so-called world out there. So the final category of this snow globe that we're in is feeling in and feeling out. So feeling in is feeling into your emotional centers that motivate you to act in certain ways and to perceive in certain ways. If you feel, for example, threat, which could be fear or anxiety, you are going to try to protect yourself, and you're going to hear and look for things that seem dangerous to you. So feeling in, you're feeling your emotional centers. Feeling out, you're feeling your physical body and its surroundings. And so again, that sense of feeling is not simply feeling things as they are, but feeling things as you experience them being. So you mix all these things together, the hearing, seeing, and feeling, and you're in a kind of wash of subjective experience that seeing something on the outside world is not objective fact. It doesn't mean that it's really there. It means that you see that as being there, but it may not be exactly what you see. In other words, you might need someone else to check it out to see if that's actually there. Did that person really wink at you? Did that person really snarl at you? Or were you just actually having some of that same feeling towards the person and you imagined that? So again, part of what I want to establish here is that you really are not good at collecting evidence from your subjective point of view, nor are you good at witnessing things accurately, because you are sort of a swirl of subjective activity that appears to be creating a world and a self that are confusing in terms of what's in here and what's out there. So in your snow globe, in my snow globe, is a mix of hearing in, hearing out, seeing out, feeling in, feeling out. And when you shake up that snow globe, you are going to pay attention to your own snowflakes. You're not going to actually pay very close attention to anything going on beyond your snow globe. In fact, most of the time walking around, we're about 45 to 85% in the swirl of our subjective activity. And then on top of that, we're actually about 95% unconscious in terms of our abilities to trace what we're doing, to know what we're doing, and so on. So you put that together, you know, about 45 to 85% subjective, 95% unconscious. You're not actually a very good historian of yourself or your experience. In other words, you need other people and you need other things going on other than your own perceptions. Now, all of this said, we actually do have some consciousness. So what I've just explained to you, I could say is pretty clearly the sense for a lot of other higher animals. They also are acting from their instincts, from their emotions, from their subjective experience. And those instincts are hardwired to bring about certain kinds of results. You might call it survival, fitness, or whatever you want to call it. What human beings have that is a little different is that we have a little bit greater consciousness. We can take a step back. We can ask a question. We can say, did I really hear that right? Did I get that? Does that make sense? So we have this little bit of subjective freedom to create a gap between us and another person and recognize, even though I see it this way, this might not be the way the world is. Even though I've heard it this way, I might not have remembered it accurately. And so we have that ability to question that other animals don't have. They cannot take that step back. They cannot create a dialogue in the midst of disagreement. All they can do is the fight, flight, freeze thing. We have this other option. And this is what we're going to be looking into in a moment when we talk about how you can reduce that sense of your own sort of moral superiority and your own self-deception in relation to the people around you. So I'm going to take just a moment now to take a question or two. Laura, you can read those to me.
Sure, yeah. So we have one question that is related to this. What is the connection to out and in domains? How deeply are they working off each other? Are they talking to each other? So that's one of the.
I would say they're more like mixed up than talking to each other. Talking to each other would assume that you can kind of discriminate really easily. I think it's more that in a kind of what you could call the stream of our consciousness, what comes through our minds, often it's really a mix of what we're hearing and seeing and what we're feeling and seeing on our own mind's eye. And part of the problem there is too that when you're feeling threatened, like when someone is speaking to you about something you disagree about, or someone is attacking you for some reason, in those moments, I think when we're more shaken up, there's more of a confusing mix of what we're feeling and what we're perceiving and what we're actually hearing and what we're saying to ourselves. I know from working with many couples over time, people need to take a long pause to sort out what they've actually heard the other person say versus what they've been thinking in their own minds, how the other person might be motivated towards them versus how they're seeing the other person. Um, in a general way, I would say if you can imagine that you first need to check and that your view of the other person is through your own snow globe and it's always through your own viewfinder. Very hard to get free of that. And that's one reason why having dialogue as a possibility, having language actually is a good thing to try to sort things out. Anything else, Lori?
Just the part two of that was, can they listen in dialogue better and better with each other over time, I think.
Yes, 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 yes. You can practice. It's like practicing anything else, like practicing the piano or practicing tennis or learning how to build a house. You know, at the beginning, you're not very good at it. As you practice, you get better at it. As you practice more, it becomes more automatic. It actually can become a part of your automatic way of speaking to someone, to take that pause when you feel emotionally activated, to begin to check out what's going on, and especially to lower that level of emotional threat, even for yourself, by breathing deeply and saying to the other person, now help me understand. Help me understand what you are saying here, or help me understand how you are looking at this. That lowers the threat level in which you can actually begin to sort things yourself better. And the better you get at the dialogue skills, the better it is for you to actually do them in your walking around life. So, so is it good to go on, do you think?
Yeah,
Uh,
I think it's good
okay.
to move on.
Okay, so here what I've tried to give you is some sense of what we call yourself. You know, as I've said many times, yourself is an interactive process. Yourself is not just something that's inside of your body. It's something that gets set up from the time you're interuterine all the way through until when you die. And as I expressed, as I talked about it in, I think, the last class, your sense of hearing comes on board around 4 months interuterine. So you begin to recognize your mother's voice. You know the rhythm of your mother's voice and so on. It starts to get organized. So these perceptions that you're having start to get organized before you come into the world. And once you get in here, they're not organized very strongly in terms of the in or the out at all. There's not the feeling like I'm in here and the world's out there. It's all kind of chaotic, and it gets sorted out gradually over development until you're about 18 months to 2 years old, when you start to get into the I, me, mine, and this is the way it is, and no, I'm not going to do it, and so on. Formation of what we call the human ego. So anyway, that's as I said, a quick trip through something complicated. And now we're going to go to this other thing that is more at the heavy heart of all of this, which is the way that we speak to each other that leads to people feeling very diminished in the presence of another person, instead of feeling like they have a fellow human being. in communication with them. So let's put up the slide on disgust and moral superiority. Um, so human beings come in equipped with 5 primary emotions. And then when we're about 18 months, we develop secondary emotions, which are the social or self-conscious emotions. But among our primary emotions that we're equipped with from birth, and again, the other higher animals have those 5 primary ones too, is the emotion of disgust. And disgust is an emotion that motivates us to avoid or pull away from what we find toxic or contaminating or dangerous. And it's there from birth, and it results in a kind of pulling away where we pull back and we even scrunch up our faces. Eventually, that fundamental primary emotion develops into a morality or moral and social aspects of our lives as we grow and develop. So disgust is at the base or the foundation of our moral principles, and it can be communicated to others easily through signals of contempt, scorn, and dismissiveness in relation particularly to others' beliefs, actions, or moral principles, either because we identify with being the victims of the other person's beliefs, or because we find the other people to be inferior to us morally or ethically. Now, again, this is a kind of a big chunk to bite off, but I think everybody gets it through their experience. If you know anything about research on the signaling of contempt, because there's a lot of research by the couples therapist and psychologist John Gottman on contempt as a subtle signal that is conveyed between partners in a couple relationship. Contempt is conveyed, it can be conveyed by a slight sort of laugh, like, huh, like that, or it can be conveyed by rolling your eyes or by going like that. It can be conveyed pretty subtly, or it can be conveyed in a much more straightforward way by hissing at someone, dismissing them, making fun of them, leaving the room, leaving in the middle of what they're saying. So many people begin a conflict by taking a position of moral superiority. They speak first about the other person's faults with a slight sort of, huh, like that. You know, like, oh, can you believe what Trump said? Or can you believe what the postmodernists think? Or can you believe what, and there's a slight smile in it, and there's a sense that's being conveyed of disgust and moral superiority. Now, if you're speaking to someone who agrees with you, that's often considered kind of virtue signaling. In other words, you're saying to the other person, you and I are on one team. We're in a tribe and we both believe this. We both assume that these things are true. So you're actually kind of talking to your snow globe. If you do this kind of thing with somebody who is on the other side of the different side, they have the experience of being put down, of being treated as though they are to be dismissed. At the extreme, you could even see it as being treated as though you're contaminated, as though you're toxic, as though there's something bad about you. So this issue of how we humans function morally and how we embrace our ideals and our beliefs is much more complex in terms of the way we convey things to each other than we might think it is. We might feel like, oh, I'm a good person. I've thought my position through carefully. I've worked on it over time, and I'm embracing a very strong and good position on this. But we might not know that we're creating in others feelings of wanting to fight us or flee us. So let's put up the next slide then, Lori, which is sort of the next step after the issue of experiencing either that a person feels that they might be morally superior to you or that they find you to be disgusting. What that activates quite naturally in humans is rage, because there's the feeling of humiliation. And humiliation is that secondary emotion of shame. It's the experience that somebody is shaming you. Somebody is exposing your weaknesses or your inferiority. So when a person expresses disgust or implies contempt or moral superiority, the other person feels humiliated and threatened because the disgust implies the isolation of the other from the group and the lowering of that person's worth or social status in the group. So when that happens, when you feel humiliated, if you don't express the rage, sometimes there's something called cold rage and hot rage, but if you don't express rage, it's likely that you're going to leave the room as your other alternative. You're either going to explode or you're going to leave the room or leave the conversation. Contempt is usually communicated by rolling the eyes, derisive laughter, making fun of, or by implied meanings that the other is stupid, deplorable, unfit. Most of us respond to humiliation by becoming enraged, and it is because it is the lowering of our social status in the group that evokes the rage and not the content of what is being said. Rage then motivates us to attack the speaker, and the two enter into a rage and humiliation cycle. So when rage and humiliation cycle through repeatedly, that's the beginning of actual true polarization that at its extreme will end in war, because neither side can trust or restore a sense of really being interested in the other's subjectivity, the other's snow globe. What's it like for you? What's it like over there? Instead, there's the gradual transformation of the other into an enemy. And typically, human beings objectify their enemies. They don't subjectify their enemies. They don't regard their enemies as subjects like themselves, with the same sorts of perceptions, thoughts, and feelings, and so on. So the movement from moral superiority to humiliation rage to objectifying an enemy is a pretty quick slide. And it can slide that way without either person really understanding, or either group, if it's two groups, really understanding how that slide worked. And then consequently, we end up in a situation where we seem entirely polarized on topics that we feel are extremely important. Topics about how to make our environment safe, how to stay healthy, how to get along with the people that we love. And we seem instead to be in a big fight about it, instead of in any way being able to see and understand each other's subjectivity. And we do have this possibility, again, as human beings, to actually take a step back and actually work to lower our own emotional threat level in order to understand what the other person is saying in a language that we share. But to do that, the very first thing we have to do is work with our own reactivity. We never start by trying to control the other person, because the other person, number one, is not under our control, period, period, period. And number two, if we attempt to do that, we're going to begin from that position of moral superiority. Like, let me tell you the truth. Let me tell you the facts on this. Or, oh, I can't believe that you think that. Or, I find that incredible that you would even, those kinds of things that we say to each other, again, they tend to have this implied contempt in them, that sense of moral superiority. And if we do it with somebody we agree with, it's a virtual signaling kind of thing. And if we're doing it with someone we disagree with, it conveys a kind of disgust thing. So I want to just take some questions right now, because this is kind of the core, and then we're going to come to a final position in the class where we kind of look at the bigger picture of why all of this is extremely important at this particular moment in time, when we're so poised for lots of bad feelings about the other side of whatever it is, whatever difference we're on. We're poised for that feeling because of our social isolation, because of the contamination themes, because of the sense of danger that people share, and because actually we've had a very hard time in the last, I don't know how many years, but I'd say 10 to 12 years of, we've had a hard time of moving away from polarization. So we're kind of heavily polarized in the world as a society and families and so on. So it's like all of the sort of fuel for fire is present. And so it's particularly important right now not to make the fire. So are there questions, Lori?
Yeah. So here's one. How can one keep from being manipulated by someone who has a different point of view? In other words, how can I determine if the other person is not just trying to convert me to their views?
Well, number one, the only way you can work with your own mind is to work with your own mind. It's not someone else's mind. And so the very first question I would ask myself, if I felt someone were manipulating me, like, what am I doing there? You know, I mean, what are my thoughts and feelings? And am I not able to listen to someone else's thoughts and feelings without actually having my own? So I know that with myself, I work with people that have quite different points of view from me. Both in my family, there are people with very different points of view from mine. There are people with very different beliefs. I do not come from a family where everybody thinks alike at all. In fact, I think I raised my children to think for themselves, and now that they do, they disagree with me. So, you know, I would let go of the idea that someone else is manipulating you, and sign on to the idea that you might be losing track of your own thoughts and feelings at certain moments. And you might need to take a pause. You might need to take a breath. You might need to ask a question or say, you know, help me understand, am I getting this correctly? Now, this does not mean that the other person is able to practice these skills. So you may be talking to someone who's shouting at you, someone who's screaming at you, someone who is walking out of the room. And at that point, you have to work with your own skills, and you have to listen in to your own mind, see what you want to do, see how you can lower the emotional threat level, see what you do think at that moment, and recognize that if another person is not cooperating with you, you can try to find out why, but perhaps that won't work. And at that moment, you might need to create a boundary. And if you do need to create a boundary, you can do that without contempt. You can do that actually by saying, okay, at this moment, you know, this isn't working for me, or I want to take a break, or I'm going to have to give this more thought. You don't have to put the other person down. So there are limits on working with other people using these skills, but actually in any situation where you feel emotional threat, the first person you work with is yourself. Remembering also that you have a snow globe. It is limited. You do not know a great deal about yourself, nor do you have the solutions to the big problems of the world. You actually need the help of others in order to even see and hear what you're thinking. And, you know, you have to actually kind of check out, okay, so tell me your point of view on this. How do you see it, in order to fully see your own? And again, that doesn't mean that you share common ground with that person. It simply means that you can do what is essentially human, which is that you can use language, you can use your words, and then you can check out whether you've heard somebody else accurately, and you can keep working on that until you do. And that sets you apart from the dog and the dolphin and the giraffe, all of the other species that we enjoy. We actually have some advantages over them. And if we take advantage of those, then we can do something that they can't do. We can pull back from our instincts. We can stop the fight and flight reactivity. And we can stop the disgust as an orientation towards another person who thinks differently from us. So I think I've done more than maybe answer the question about manipulation, but it was a good question. Is there another question?
Yeah, I mean, this is going back to disgust, but someone was requesting that you name the other four primary emotions.
Okay,
You want to
so
talk
I
about
want
them?
to, yeah, okay, so I want to say that there are a lot of different ways to slice up, not a lot, but there are a few ways to slice up the primary emotions. I feel, because I've studied all of the researchers on emotions, I need to say that some people slice it into 6, some people into 9, and some into 5. I like the 5. And so joy and curiosity, and sadness, fear, and disgust. Now, fear sometimes is not called an emotion. Sometimes it's called an instinctual response rather than an emotion. So some researchers would put anger in place of fear into the 5. I frankly think anger is a more developed emotion. But again, all of us are slicing up these primary motivators that we see in the human infant and that are expressed on the face and the gestures of the infant. The important thing to know is that there's always a minority of positive emotion and a majority of negative emotion in all human emotion. In other words, our emotions are there to protect us from threat more than they are to get us to enjoy and engage. So we remember and we think about what doesn't work and what scares us much more than about what works and what we enjoy. You'll notice that in your own mind. You'll notice it in other people's minds. It gives us certain kinds of advantages in our survival, but it also makes us very provocative in regard to war and conflict, in that we often see what's wrong and we often don't engage in what's working well. So let's put up the last slide then, Lori, because that's kind of where we're going even, and then if there's time, I'll take another question. So one reason why I wanted to do this program today is because I feel at this moment in the midst of this crisis, and by crisis, I mean, this is such a major crisis, whether you look at it from the pandemic, from the economic, from the social or psychological. We are in a major time of shakeup. And so at this time, this is a particularly important time to avoid humiliation and rage, and to practice instead what I call the don't know mind. That is the mind that says, maybe I don't know everything here. Maybe I haven't seen the bigger picture. Maybe somebody else's point of view is really interesting. And because this person is a part of my species and actually also has a snow globe of subjectivity, it might be worth investigating that. So many of us are so interested in species other than our own. But our own species is going to play a very dominant role in the world in the next few years. And if we were to go into a nuclear war, that would destroy the environment. If we were not able to solve the problems of future pandemics, that could destroy our species. If we can't go forward in conversations in our families That could destroy our families and civilization. So this is the time to really work hard to reduce and even eliminate in your own life the humiliation rage cycle, and instead to practice the, please help me understand, I don't know. So here I am going to quote a little bit from the Buddha. As I said, I bring this in, and I brought this particular quote in, but from a different translation at another time in one of the courses. So in these fundamental teachings of the Buddha, in something called the Dhammapada, there is a verse that I think is extremely important right now to return to again and again, and that is that hatred never ends through hatred. By non-hate alone does it end. This is an ancient truth. Non-hate here does not mean love. You don't have to love another person in order to have a dialogue with them. You don't have to agree. All you have to do is to reduce your desire to humiliate them. That may be an unconscious desire, but you can notice it if you smirk, if you roll your eyes, if you have a certain attitude. You'll notice, oh my gosh, I might be taking a position of moral superiority that comes across as hate. Non-hate actually means essentially the quality of equanimity. Equanimity is a gentle, matter-of-fact attitude towards your experience, not pushing it away, not grabbing onto it. So equanimity is actually the cure for hatred. And that is your ability to recognize, this is the experience I'm having right now, without pushing it away or pulling on it. This is the person I'm talking to right now. The person and I disagree, but I can actually open my ears and hear. And then I can try to actually listen. And then I can check out, did I understand? This is what I believe you're saying. Did I get this right? Until the other person says, yeah, you got it. And if you go through that process, I guarantee you will learn. You will learn a lot about someone else's snow globe, and you might learn something about your own. And maybe you don't agree at all, but you'll find out that there's a different kind of tree growing in that snow globe from what's growing in yours. So that, I think, is one of the most important things to keep in mind, that hatred never ends through hatred. And so remembering that you are in your own snow globe, and that you can embrace your subjectivity instead of your moral superiority. That means that you recognize you're just one person, and you just see things from the point of view of that one person. And you're here briefly, and things change rapidly. And perhaps the don't know mind is a good one to bring through every now and then. So ask questions, listen mindfully to others, remain curious, and learn something new as often as you can. And if you could do that, that will ripple out to others and others and others. And then we could potentially solve the problems that we're facing instead of creating war. So the final thing I want to mention here is something also from the Dhammapada. And this is a verse that follows soon after the other verse, maybe just after, I don't remember. Many do not realize that we here must die. For those who realize this, quarrels end. Many do not realize that we here must die. For those who realize this, quarrels end. In other words, our quarrels are not the important reason why we're here. The important reason why we're here is actually to find kindness, generosity, and to function with greater compassion towards our own species especially, and then all of the other species, because we are born with a natural compassion and a natural curiosity. That's what we're hardwired with from the beginning, along with those other emotions. And we can develop those two things, curiosity and compassion, and end up with those being the basis for our existence here instead of these quarrels and polarizations. So thank you for being a part of the course. I don't think there's time for another question, but I'm going to follow Lori's direction on that. If there is, I'd be happy to answer.
No, there's not time today for another question, but I did want to bring up before we leave, if you are interested in these topics, that Polly's podcast, Enemies from Word of Wisdom, pretty much dives pretty deeply into a lot of these topics here. So that would be a good thing to check out on the website. And then this Saturday, as Polly was mentioning earlier, we are all stuck in a snow globe, is at 11 o'clock Eastern time. So you can sign up for that on the website. And then we're going to be doing another free talk here next Monday at this same time at 4 to 5 Eastern. Stop predicting and start listening. So that's all in conjunction with the Rowe Center. So we would love for everyone to join us at any one of those spots in the near future.
Thank you very much, folks. Thank you so much for being with me.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.